Hi, we'd like to welcome you to another in a series of webinars designed for public transit agencies. I'm Terry Bills and I'm the Transportation Industry Manager here at Esri. And today I'm joined by Alan Ibaugh, Doug Lynch, and Patrick Meenan, all from our business partner DTS. So today's webinar is focused on creating an effective asset management program for transit, what's often called state of good repair. And this is an area of great interest to public transit agencies, not only from a regulatory perspective, but also because I think they've come to recognize the importance of good asset management practice and preserving their infrastructure. That said, I think it's still an area where public transit agencies grapple with establishing good workflows and building effective systems to help them make better investment decisions. So in today's webinar, we hope to show you what we consider to be good practice in transit asset management and how you can turn that information into actionable intelligence. Before we begin, I'd like to point out that we are recording this webinar, and while everyone will be on mute, there will be time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box and we'll try to answer as many as time allows. To start, I think we all know that it was really MAP 21 that mandated that public transit agencies adopt a transit asset management plan, which requires at a minimum a comprehensive inventory, a condition assessment, and a way to prioritize investment decisions. It was probably came about as a recognition that for too many years, many of our major public transit systems had to defer maintenance, and really which ultimately led to a significant degradation in many of our urban transit systems. We think of New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco Bay Area, among others. And I think this really led Congress to decide that we really needed to change those practices. And so again, the requirement for a transit asset management plan. That said, I think public transit agencies are often latecomers, if you will. I work with state departments of transportation, and I think they've really been practicing good asset management for a little bit longer. And I think the key issue is that really to be successful in asset management, it does represent a change in culture and in processes really to be effective. And again, the main purpose of practicing good asset management is how do we prolong the life cycle of the assets and really to be significantly more cost effective over the life of the asset. So the goal ultimately with good asset management is how do we move from reactive into ultimately predictive asset management so that we can reduce the risk of failures and then significantly reduce the life cycle costs of maintenance. So how do we, as it says, make the right work at the right time to achieve the right level of service for the right cost? And I think that's really the main goal of good asset management practice. Final element is really the incorporation of risk into asset management, and that's probably a newer concept for many asset managers, but I think it's been part of the best practice in asset management for some time. And the concept really is that for every major asset, you should actually calculate a risk profile, which is really the likelihood of failure times the consequence of failure, and that really gives you a risk profile for every asset, every critical asset that you have, and it helps you prioritize which assets are more critical and which need to be given higher priority. There are I'm sure many of you are already familiar. There are some good resources out there that are available to sort of help. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alan and today's presentation on good asset management. So Alan, take it away.
Thanks, Terry. You hear me all right?
Yeah, we can.
Very good. Well, good morning or afternoon, everyone, from wherever you reside from. We're going to talk a lot about some of the things or actually show examples about what Terry was talking about on state of good repair and asset management and building a transit asset management plan. I think some of the keys here is we want to show it against a case study. So it's really going through the whole life cycle of asset management, and the ability to, in this particular case with what Lynx did, is not only looked at while they're going through the process of building the transit asset management plan for the state of good repair, they said, well, let's go ahead and look at our other assets, because there's assets such as bus stops that may not be part of that state of good repair equation, but they are part of their enterprise asset management need. So when we go out and do the different stages that Terry talked about, from inventory to condition assessment to risk analysis, we looked at that across all those different asset types, whether they be state of good repair or not, but we're part of the enterprise asset management system. So we'll show you some examples of that. I've teamed today with a couple folks from DTS. So I'm the CEO, and then we have Doug Lynch, our senior project manager, who's led the Lynx initiative, as well as Patrick Meenan, who leads a lot of our technology solutions area. So you're going to hear from each of us today. I just have a couple of slides real quick about who DTS is, in case you've never heard of us before. We focus specifically in the asset management arena, and we do three things in that arena. One is we collect data. Some of those data collections are done with our mobile vehicle. So when we did this Lynx project, we used our mobile vehicle to go look at bus stops, transit locations, even some sidewalk information for ADA compliance. Then we supplemented that with boots on the ground, because you're not going to get slopes and things like that for ADA without getting next to the asset. So you have to do that with boots on the ground. But that's one line of business for us. Another line of business is custom software development. Why is that important? Because an enterprise asset management system normally has to bring in other pieces of software and to talk to that enterprise asset management system. In this case, you think of things like trapeze and ridership data. It could be some facilities-based information, so fueling systems for your fleet, and then HVAC equipment, you name it, any number of things that are running SCADA systems and that provide information that we need to incorporate inside of our asset management system. We have a line of business focused around that. And what you're going to be seeing today, and probably where we spend the bulk of our time, is the asset management. So it's asset management system itself called VWorks, and then the different pieces of the puzzle. What we had to do to go through the state of good repair and the transit asset management plan requirements and build the inventory, the condition assessment, and then bring all that together to get to the last things that Terry was talking about, is really getting to risk analysis so that you can build a capital plan. This is just showing you a few of the clients that we're working with. Today we'll focus on Lynx, but you can see we do rail and the departments of transportation and city, county government as well, and apply similar principles depending on what the end reporting need is to the whole lifecycle asset management process. So with this, I'm going to turn it over to Doug to talk about how Lynx started, what they looked at when they saw the transit asset management plan requirements, and what we went through to build out the equation for them.
All right, thanks, Alan. I'll just have you hit the next button when it's time, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, so a little background on Lynx, just so everybody's aware of what the breadth is of their services and so forth. You know, Lynx is operating on current fiscal year 2019 budget of $142 million. They have over 310 air conditioned coaches in their fleet, 76 local, what they call Lynx routes that are maintained. You know, all the buses run and pick up passengers, and they have constant service. They have bus rapid transit. They have paratransit as well. So wanted to kind of set the stage, so you kind of, as we talk a little bit about the FTA TAM final rule and what our project ended up doing as far as implementing, pulling the information together that was required for the TAM plan. So obviously everything got kicked off with MAP 21, as Terry alluded to, and in 2016 became a requirement. Next slide. So as Terry alluded to, and Alan as well, the term state of good repair is of paramount importance to FTA, because any transit provider that's receiving any dollars and providing services to the public, they have to be in good operable condition. It only makes sense, and Terry showed a couple examples of some situations that have gotten behind because their state of good repair is not where it should be. So just to go a couple definitions on it, that state of good repair being that condition in which that capital asset is able to operate at a full level of performance, meaning it can perform its design function, doesn't pose any known acceptable safety risks to the public, and its life cycle investments must have been met or recovered. Next slide, please. So Lynx is a tier 1, not a tier 2, but a tier 1 provider. And so with the TAM rule, there was a requirement of any agency that's over 101 vehicles. I mentioned there are over 300, or greater than or equal to 100 vehicles in one non-fixed route mode. They have to do the TAM plan. They have additional elements. So they have tier 1 requirements as well as what tier 2 also has to do. So if you hit the next button now. So this kind of talks about this little matrix here. It kind of shows what exactly is all required. So everything from inventory to capital assets. So what do they have in relation to the equipment and rolling stock and so forth. So the condition of that, the decision support tools behind that, investment prioritization, meeting the state of good repair policy as part of the TAM, the implementation strategy, listing of the key annual activities, identification of those resources, and an evaluation plan. So what we're going to focus on today is talking more about the data and the information that gets then pushed up into the plan and then out to sort of the strategy and the prioritization process.
Yeah, I was just going to add there, Doug. I mean, the key here is that you can see if you're tier 1, these additional, want to make sure you're aware and have this in your slide deck on this presentation, that you're aware you have to cover these other 5 areas that the tier 2s don't.
Right. All right, next slide, please. And so they have them broken down as from the asset side. If you look at the screen to the part of the slide on the right, it says assets, you got equipment, rolling stock, infrastructure, and facilities. Those are the 4 key groups, and each has its own performance measure. And the useful life benchmark is of critical importance because there are known expected life expectancy for certain assets. So for example, buses are expected to have a useful life benchmark of 14 years. So with that, getting that information, gathering the condition inspection, looking at the age of the vehicle and those kinds of things help you to determine, you know, is it in the state of good repair based on its useful life benchmark and how old it is and so forth as you go forward. Next. This was kind of a cool slide because I like to be able to show how the importance of what goes into the TAM plan itself and then what gets submitted to the National Transit Database as well. So going from the top down, revenue vehicles, those things that are owned, right? So all the owned vehicles that produce revenue, they're not only supposed to be in the inventory for the TAM plan, but also submitted to FTA with the National Transit Database requirements as well. And same thing for equipment. You'll see yeses. So we highlighted where all the yeses are, and they're you know, for the most part consistent from what has to go into a TAM plan versus what has to go into the National Transit Database, and the ones that also have state of good repair targets. Next. So this leads us to our actual collection, and Alan showed you an example of some of the vehicles that we use to collect this information. So we're able to drive down the road at speed limit safely and collect all this information. So bus stop signs, shelters, passenger facilities, transfer stops. They have at links what they call super stops as well, where they have large transfer stations. So catching all that information. Next. There's some pictures of some of those assets and some of the visuals that you see as part of that inventory. So some that we call sort of the stick stops on the bottom left versus the, just the benches, where benches are existing next to a stick stop. So you think of it from a database perspective, in the GIS spectrum of it, I have a database that says, yes, I have a stop, I have an ID, I have the link route that it's on, I have its condition, I have other amenities that are associated to it, and might have a shelter, a yes or a no, those kinds of things. You can see it's indicative of these pictures. Next. This is kind of a picture of sort of how we use certain software, select software, to be able to put that information into the database. So we collect all this information, we have all this imagery, and we are able to pull it out and extract out the X, Y, and Z position location and put it into a geodatabase, enterprise geodatabase, that then we can do a condition inspection from, a number of things that we can do that kind of gets us to more of the advanced asset management pieces.
Yeah, I was going to mention here, Doug, this is really so that we could set up the data schema correctly, that it would go right into the National Transit Database. So we've got that. As we're extracting information, we're getting it set up in the right data schema. I'd also mention, I don't want to throw folks off, bus stops not necessarily part, as I mentioned this earlier, not part of the TAMP requirement. However, Link said, let's take this opportunity and take the extra steps so that we know we're going to do our facilities inventory. We know we're going to do our rolling stock inventory. But what are our other assets that we're responsible for? Let's go ahead and get this full system put in place. So they did that here. Sorry, Doug, I know you got one more.
No, you're good. So this one, not sure how many of you've seen this, but I think this is a really cool crosswalk that shows all the different asset inventory module that's part of the National Transit Database. So for example, like A10 being administrative and maintenance facility inventory, passenger and parking facility inventory being A20, and so forth. I'm not going to read them all, but you can see all this elements of information that has to be required. So what we did at DTS is take and reverse engineer the requirements of the National Transit Database output file that's in the format, the exact format that goes on behalf of links to FTA, and backed it into what we call our facility module. And that's where we allow we can build that asset hierarchy tree and match up all the requirements that you see here in this sheet here. I don't know, Al, is there you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say, and you're breaking them down by these A10, A20, right? So that's the reporting requirements for each of those. So we've built our data model around that to make it easy to do, like you said, the reporting and everything.
Yeah.
So I'll take it from here, Doug. Thanks.
Good.
Yeah. So the idea is that we went and collected this information and brought it in, made sure that we applied it to the data scheme and brought it into an enterprise asset management system. In this case, the enterprise asset management system is totally built on top of Esri technology. So all the mapping components, and even down to, if you're into linear referencing and those things, the roads and highway systems that Esri has built out, all that incorporated and utilizing their APIs to bring in information and map services so that we could go do lifecycle asset management on top of the Esri platform. So that's what VWorks allows us to do. So you can see there's just any number of data layers over here on the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side, some of the things that Terry talked about, and Doug as well, allowing us to get to any of that condition information, risk information, and building out a capital budget as part of our transit asset management plan, all handled within this particular pull-down menu. So it's pretty easy to get to information. So some of the things that we've done within the application is we've first off brought in the inventory data and we built an asset registry. And there's two ways inside the system to build that asset registry. You can do it through the Esri GIS and geodatabases, so that if we have points, lines, and polygons of our assets, we can do it that way. Or we can, in a lot of cases within transit agencies, we also need to be able to support a facility hierarchy. So in this case, you can see here, link central station and all the different components associated with that station, and then tracking any kind of information along with every single component within the station. So I have pictures of the different equipment, of the different utilities that may be there. I may have an as-built drawing associated with it, all that sort of information incorporated within each layer of the application. So in this case, in each layer of that hierarchy. So you see the same thing as if this was the links building, it could be floor 1, floor 2, and then break it down into its rooms and all its components. Then we took that asset hierarchy and then we built out all of the different needs for the National Transit Database, so that when we're building out this TAMP, both the plan as well as the information that needs to be collected to fulfill the TAMP requirements, as we showed in that data structure that was a couple slides ago, we're breaking it down into the revenue vehicle inventory, service vehicles, right, A70s, A60s, and all that, and then going deeper inside of that particular each asset level within inside that hierarchy. So I can come in and look at, okay, if we're looking at this Link Central Station, I may want to see what kind of information we have in terms of the passenger and parking facility condition assessment. So we have an inventory of it, but now we can bring in condition data as well and say, okay, what's the roof condition? What's the interiors look like? And then we're able to see that information. And in this case, on work order. So for work management purposes, I want to go out and do some sort of improvement to the roof. I may want to tie that to the state of good repair inspection, so that we went and did this particular work, and that would add value and potentially life to that particular roof. And then now it lasts maybe another 5 years or that sort of thing. Anyway, the key component here is that we've broken down the hierarchy in the right way so that it is set up for the National Transit Database reporting. This kind of zooms in on some of that more and looking at some different types of asset information. So in this case, we can actually bring in the fleet vehicles that are associated with what Links has and break them into their different categories, and then look at all the attribute information associated and track that attribute information. And Patrick will show you in a little bit, this can all be done through a tool we call Facility View that allows us to come in and do this through a mobile application that will feed into this overall web-based solution. So you don't necessarily have to have the web application to go and collect the data in the field. If you're going to go out and look at the different buses or walk around the facility and look at filling in this attribute information, then you can do that through a mobile tool as well. And then we can actually drill down further into each of these. With every single asset you see here, we could have a condition inspection on it, a risk assessment, what's the valuation of it, any service calls that happen, like what kind of maintenance have we been doing against this particular vehicle and how often do we have to go back and do that maintenance. And then we can bring in information, as I mentioned before, fueling data and that sort of thing for when they need to go do oil changes and that sort of stuff associated with the maintenance management. When you think about the TAMP plan, Transit Asset Management Plan, it's not just a one-time inventory and a one-time assessment. You need to look at this over its life cycle. So maintenance management is 100% important, that we're going to go back and apply maintenance management to every single asset that we have here. And that's part of the overall plan itself. So as you can see, the way we've broken this down from a TAMP reporting perspective, I can come in here and I could look at particular areas if I want to. I could report on all of the different, A00 to A70s, or I could look at specific ones. So in this case, I just want to look at my revenue vehicle inventory and pull that information out, so the system allows us to just provide the report by each category if we wish to. And then we can extract that in multiple formats. So we could do Adobe, PDF, just in a number of things. You can actually even do a PowerPoint of this, or it could be a CSV file, that sort of thing. In this case, I'm pretty certain, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to put it in a CSV for it to be put into the National Transit Database. I'm pretty certain that's the case.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. They don't allow us to send it any other way. Okay, and then So we have the ability to do that from a reporting perspective, but then we can also come in here and we can manage, think about the whole, as I mentioned, the whole life cycle of the assets that we're managing with at links. I can look at anything from a service request. And now I've got a shelter that's the windows this has been broken, and so they have to come in, the bus shelter, and it's damaged, and what kind of, go out there and do an inspection, potentially fix this. So I can handle everything from a service request on my asset infrastructure to the maintenance management against it. So in this case, shelter maintenance, and look at, okay, what are the costs associated with this? What are the tasks that are associated with what I have to do? I have to put a new panels on a truck, and I have to get them out there. And then I may have to do something with the posts themselves, depending if they're damaged, and what's the labor associated with that, the equipment needed. So I need a truck that carries all those stuff on it, the inventory, and then what assets. And again, what did we do to the asset? So I can say, I put this much work into fixing it. Now I have brand new panels out there. We've added this much life to it. So what's the valuation of that asset after we do that work? Just think about that whole round tripping of the work that you're doing against your assets. And then we can come in and look at the different part within our hierarchy, depending on how we break this down. This obviously we've tried to put it into the right way for the National Transit Database, but you could come in here and have this. This could be just your Links Central Sunrail station could be at the top of this hierarchy, depending on how you could have multiple hierarchies at the top here, as you can see. Anyway, you go into the central station, you can look at, okay, what are our condition? What's that look like? And we have, again, in the field tools that you can take, product called Mobile View as well as Facility View that allows you to go out in the field and do these ratings on each of the different types of assets within the particular facility. So here we're looking at the passenger and parking facilities within a Link Central station. And then you can build, these are all configurable. I think that's something I haven't mentioned yet, that the way that these scale is usually 0 to 100, but it could be a 0 to 10. And then you're utilizing that to give it some sort of good, fair, poor type of rating. So, and then you can figure out, this helps us to figure out where do we prioritize the activities that need to happen to go into our plan. The idea is that you're not just going to do every single asset. You have limited resources. So how do we prioritize which assets do we need to address first? You can use condition, and you can also use this area of risk that Terry talked about earlier, the ability to look at what's the consequence if this asset were to fail, and what's the probability of it failing. And these, again, configurable about, in this case, we're looking at bus stops, and what could potentially happen if this bus stop were to fail, and what's that risk of that failing, and seeing how, if these were all high potential issues, perhaps this particular bus stop, because it's not in very good condition, needs to move to the top of our list. Now, as I know, as I talked about before, it's more rolling stock and facilities here, but you apply the same concept to that rolling stock and facilities. And if this were to fail, I can use this as a prioritization mechanism to help me figure out, okay, I've got limited resources. This one moves to the top. This bus moves to the top. This shelter moves to the top. This central station moves to the top, whatever it may be. So risk helps us do that. And so I combine the condition, the risk, the valuation of the asset, and what kind of work I'm going to do on it. And I look at things such as within our the VWorks system for degradation curves. So over time, this is how this particular asset is likely to fail, and what level of service do we want to raise it to? So it's performing at a 40, but once it gets down here, we need to get this up to an 80. How much work do we need to do to get there, and which assets come first? And the whole budget forecasting across multiple asset types allows us to do that here, and that becomes part of that TAMP capital plan that gets built for Links, so they can look at, okay, here's what we're going to do, facilities first, and they're looking at this in a 10-year time frame, but there's a lot of what ifs you can do. You could have a TAMP plan that's looking out 20 years, 30 years. If you're dealing with a water plant, those things last 100 years or so, so you're really looking at a 100-year plan. But in transportation asset management and transit asset management, you're really more in the 5 to 10-year time frame in terms of planning for your assets. Obviously, you're doing work on them every year, but you're looking at it over a little bit longer horizon. A couple other things that I mentioned this early on, and I think it's important to hit on just quickly, is the ability of the system to bring in other data. So you're not just making decisions in your TAMP plan only from the inventory that you did. You may want to look at ridership information to see, okay, these are the routes and the shelters and the stops that get utilized the most, or the stations that get utilized the most, and we can link in that trapeze ridership data to bring that information across. Or I may want to look at these different parts of our building. In this case, we're looking at an air compressor, how they're performing and what we need to do there. But the ability to link in other business systems and their data is important, so that helps us in decision making down the line. Obviously, dashboards have become very popular, so the ability here to look at across the whole assets that we have within the system and look at how are we looking in our rolling stock. So look, we've got quite a few in the poor condition state. We can drill into this information from the application and look at those specific and say, okay, what kind of work plan can we put against these? We can look at which ones, how much are within certain value ranges and that sort of thing, and how many open work orders we have from a maintenance perspective, and what are those work orders that we need to do. This is just, and we'll show this here in a minute, but the idea that I talked about earlier, I can come in here and look at this particular vehicle, but I can handle the actual filling out of the information in the field if I wish to, or taking pictures of it. This is just a mobile tool that we have, responsively designed. Could be used on a phone, form factor of a phone or a tablet. And then we have some other applications that are available so that when you're out in the field, they're utilizing these tools just to take a picture and say, hey, we've had a lot of damage here. Send that back in and bring it into the system and say, hey, what kind of work do we need to do, apply to this to go and fix, there's an issue, what work do we apply to it, what inventory, what equipment to go fix it. So it's just very simple, take a picture, bus stop has major damage, type it in, or you can actually speak into your phones. It takes that information and sends it in. And then once it comes into the application, then you can utilize it here to actually create those different work orders and the processes to get that work complete. I think this is the last slide I have is about the ability to even take this further. So they come in and brought this information in the system. Since it's an enterprise asset management system, why don't we utilize it for everything that we do? So in this case, they're bringing it across and they're actually using it into their advertising programs. And again, you can link in on all kinds of documents and information. So we're seeing at those bus stops, what kind of advertising do we have? When does it, when does it come up for renewal? All that kind of stuff. Why not? I mean, the way I see it is you've got a system that allows you to do this, collect this information in the field. Let's supplement what we have in a TAMP plan and use it for all kinds of other types of applications as well. Okay, I think my time's up. I'm going to turn over to Terry. If you can turn over to Patrick from here.
All right, Patrick, you should have the controls.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, and you can see my screen. So, all right, Alan was showing a lot of information. So this is the VWorks interface here. We have our large section in the middle with a map section. Our upper left-hand corner is our administrative or menu pane, and then our bottom pane on the left-hand side is our data pane. This is consuming a published REST map service from Esri. It's a bidirectional live interface with the GIS. It comes standard with API Esri map controls, provides us the ability to turn on and off layers. And so we're going to select here a bus stop. And once I do that, all of our data that we just selected becomes visible in our data pane. This is all the attribution. I'm logged on as administrator, so I see everything and I have complete access. But we have tight configurable controls that allow you to lock down data fields. But I have the ability here to edit attribute information, which would feed back directly to the GIS. As Alan mentioned, you have access to everything that has been done. So you can have documents, work orders. We open that up. We can see work orders that have been done to that bus stop. We can see condition inspections that have been done, and it keeps a complete history. There's only one condition inspection done on this stop. It gives us access to the risk information, the valuation. We have a data link here to Trapeze that shows ridership information and risk, consequence of a failure versus probability of failure. Our menus allow us to drag and open up so we can see more information. If we switch to valuation, we'll see the useful life remaining. And the key thing here on the work management side, if we do work orders against this asset, we can increase the useful life by adding part of it to the valuation of the cost of the work order.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Patrick, the only main thing about, and think about this when you're doing your TAMP plan, is one of the key elements of the inventory that you need is, and valuation drills towards this, is the install date. So you need somewhere to start from. Now, that being said, you can potentially infer it if you don't have that information. You know, when was the building built? You have as-built against that. When was when did we procure the different rolling stock that we have? Normally you'll have that information, but I think it's just important. One of the key schema or attribute information that you need to have in an asset management plan is that install year.
Thank you. And here's the work management side. So this is a service request area of service request that came in. We have multiple ways of handling service requests. This service request came in from, I believe, a field view module, but we have apps for public to access the information. So it shows that bus stop that Alan was showing that has the major damage to it. Then this will also allow us to create a work order, and it's easily, all the modules are tightly integrated together, so we could open up and get all the work information. This one is still open, but if we go to the cost tab, and we're on, it shows estimated, our inventory. So as we can see, we didn't have this in our inventory module, but it allows us to enter ad hoc inventory items into the cost. And then when that work's complete, it sends back and closes the service request and then notifies whoever submitted that service request that that work has been done. So that's a quick overview of work management. We're going to drop into the TAM inventory, and we're going to see that hierarchy of that was built based off of all the reporting requirements of the TAM inventory. So we go in here to our revenue vehicle. We will see, here's our bus information, allows us to open up individual buses, same drop-down capability, and all this is configured. You can add stuff. We could add a data link field here to pull in fuel management information, which will allow you to trigger work orders based off miles on a vehicle or engine runtime. Allows us to store documents. There's a picture of that one. We can go through different, no photo wrap on that one. And then we have our passenger. We were looking at Link Central Station earlier. If we go down to work orders, there's two ways of doing a condition inspection. We embedded them here into a work order form for scheduling. And you'll see here we have a slightly different work order number. So what this was was a condition inspection work order. We'll select our asset here. And we had a pass of 62 on our condition inspection. And as we can see here, there was issues with the HVAC, the electrical. And so what we did, doing it through the work order, is provided us the ability to create a child work order so they can go do the work. So this was a work order to fix the AC, electrical, and to clean the site. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to create a new work order for a new condition inspection since the work has been done. And this allows you to sign it.
I was going to add that the way it's set up is for every choice for type, department, and group, it chooses and creates different configured choices. So when Patrick was toggling from TAM to different things, you have different group options and activity descriptions. Sorry, Patrick.
Okay, all good. And then, so I just created this new work order, and I'm actually going to hop over to my phone. Let me,
We're seeing you.
and you're seeing it?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. So what I'm going to do here, this is the work order we just created in the work order module with the condition inspection. So I'm going to, and we know that work, I always click on the screen when I'm supposed to be using my fingers. And so we can see that all the asset information is brought down to the field device. You go over to condition, and I'm going to so we inspected our roof, so I can quickly enter values in here. And we have our drop downs. I'm
These
not
can
going
be
to go through all of them,
established.
but you get the point
Yeah,
based off of what we've done here. It'll allow, the mobile app will allow us to take images, store images, associate our time, different information of what we've done. And another way of getting to here would be through, you can do an inspection through our facility module that Alan was talking about. The facility view contains the same hierarchy that we were just looking at, but it also provides the ability, you'll see a barcode scanner. So if you had an asset ID with a barcode information, or it also allows you to search an asset. drills down and automatically takes us to that. And so another option for creating an inspection would be to add, we're going to create a copy so we can see what the last inspection was, and then it'll allow us to update information on that inspection as well. And then once we've completed that information or that inspection, we can sync back to the server, and that information will sync back to that asset. And then I think Alan mentioned TAM reporting. We have all these filter buttons, and you can save your filter so it's a report you run all the time. And once I apply the filter, I can go over to our report. And get a preview, and this is the report of our ASTAT of the rolling stock inventory, and like Alan mentioned earlier, allows us to export it into the format that we need to bring the information into the National Transit data set.
Yeah, that's excellent. Was there anything else you wanted to show, Patrick?
I think that's it.
Okay, cool. I just wanted
Do you want to show anything in here? Want me to go anywhere? Are you okay?
No, I'm good. I think we've covered most of it. I just want to tie it all back together for everyone. So the idea is that what the links process was in their case study is to go out, we've looked at the TAMP requirements and said, okay, we need to establish an inventory, establish a condition inspection of all of our assets, and then bring them into a tool where we can do the modeling of how do we, which assets do we prioritize based on funding requirements that are there, and then build a capital plan around that. So that's the whole thing that they were looking at. And while they were going through that process, they said, well, let's go ahead and extend it to our whole enterprise so that it's all asset management to them across the board. So let's extend it across the board and then build our reporting so that we meet the National Transit Database requirements. So that's trying to tie it all back together through the technology is facilitating it, but at the end, it really comes down to the reports that are in the data sets that are required back that have to go into the National Transit Database and the requirements from FTA. So they're meeting those through these types of inspections, utilizing both mobile tools and web-based tools, as well as the data collection technology. Okay, Terry, I think we're good unless Doug and Patrick has anything else.
Okay, good. So we will open it up for questions. We've had a few that have come in already, and feel free to type into the question box. And as we mentioned, we'll try to answer as many as we can. So someone did ask if we would make the slides available, and yes, we always put these the slides on the GeoNet group at Esri for transportation, and you'll be able to find them there along with other links as well. There was a question and I think in the demo you were showing the facility rating, and you showed a 100-point scale for the elements of the facility. I guess the question really was, how do you then convert that to the FTA's 1 through 5 condition rating scale?
Yep. So that can be established. Everything's configurable here, and that's a typical question that comes up. You have to put everything on an index to some extent to compare one thing to another. So it's usually 100 index, but you can make your 1 to 5, and you can build it as divided by 20, and this is good, fair, poor, excellent kind of thing. So to each 20-point increment, and anything in between kind of falls in each of those categories. So the 1 to 5 represents, and you can scale it to the 1 to 100. Typically what you do, we've had 1 to 10 scales and that sort of thing as well. But there's the idea is that you have to compare asset to asset. You have to put, and if you want to do cross asset comparisons, you need to be able to put them onto an index of some sort. So we've got folks that actually use, for this, obviously the 1 to 5 is what it gets scaled back to, but we've got multiple different types of scales that they go against. But usually we behind the scenes in VWorks then will convert it to the 1 to 100 if it's not already that way.
Right, and I think that's a good point, because one of the most difficult things is how do I look at all of my assets across asset categories, and then how do I make intelligent decisions in terms of where do I spend, what do I prioritize, and where do I spend the money? And I think that the ability to have some type of a scaling system is sort of critical to that as well. So. How long?
Just real quick, Terry, just one other thing I want to add. You can also weight those. So the potential is you may have certain assets or certain types of condition, structural defects or something that you may want to weight more than another. You can do those sorts of things within the system too.
Right, exactly. So how long has Lynx been, how long have they actually been practicing this type of asset management? How long have they been at it? Do you know?
Well, they didn't get into the state of good repair right away. That really came after the requirement came out. They've been doing asset management and maintenance management within VWorks since I think 2012. But the last 3 years has really got the focused on the state of good repair pieces, obviously because of the mandate.
Right. And I think that's, again, I think any number of transit agencies have really sort of grappling with, again, that notion, how do we establish these good, workflows, good business practices, and I know that we've really dealt with any number of transit agencies that are, really still trying to work through those issues. So. Let's see, any other questions that people have? This would be the time to catch Alan and the crew there. So so maybe I'll in terms of how does Lynx, obviously they have rolling stock. I believe Lynx has a light rail and facilities, and how do they grapple with really making investment decisions across those asset classes? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yep. So they don't necessarily own the rail side yet. So they have a commuter rail system that they're they're planning that though, because I think the commuter rail system is currently operated by Florida Department of Transportation, but it is going to be moved to the locals, I think 3 years from now. And the likely place where it lands is Lynx. So as you mentioned, Terry, these kinds of things have to be planned on. So they're inside of their capital budgeting, they're utilizing our tools to go through first around in, I would call them silos still. So facilities, so you're looking at stations, and then you're looking at bus stops, and then you're looking at rolling stock, and those are kind of siloed. They do that, but since the tool is a what if tool, they can just do those siloed first and then bring it back to, okay, now let's look at them together so that they can get over an overall capital budget. And they're looking at using that risk analysis, which they just started in the last year or so, starting to look at risk to help them prioritize in each of those categories from a silo perspective, is also when they do the cross asset. I mean, certain things have to happen before others from safety perspective and that sort of thing. They usually use in that capital budgeting, safety comes at the top. So that anything that's a safety concern, they're looking at ADA compliance and that sort of thing with their sidewalks and the things around bus stops. Those are all in there so that they're part of the capital budget, and then they can weigh one against the other. And they're going to start doing that using risk as a criteria to do so. And they haven't had that until the last year or so. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add one other thing. So one of the things that's cool about the risk module and the budget forecasting modules, we're able to look at, somebody was asking about the term scale. So FTA is looking from a state of good repair perspective of a 3 or better. just to make sure that's best interest. So using our tool to be able to forecast and look at the assets out into the future, how long do they predict? Is the data showing it would predict based on its useful life remaining, the remaining life and its useful life benchmark and its current condition, how long can it remain a 3? Or what do we have to do and what's the time frame? So it helps them for the, as Alan was alluding to, the budget forecasting, the capital improvement planning that they have to do every year. So just wanted to add that in.
Okay, and let's see. There was a question about how the data transfer modules from links to the EAS, I assume the EAS system, to other.
Are you talking to the transit database? Is that what they're asking?
Yeah, I'm not
EAS,
sure.
or they're talking about a data link to something.
Yeah, I think handling the data links to other business systems.
Yeah. So that's really depends on having some level of ODBC compliant data format. So if the business system is a fueling system, or if it's a payroll system, or you name it, they just have to have some ability to have an asset ID and like an Access file, Excel file, you name it, Oracle database, SQL database, that sort of thing. Those are the types of things that can be linked into the information, into the VWorks system, and used just like it was a table within the system itself.
Okay.
On the National Transit database side, that's really where we're extracting those CSVs and uploading from there, if that was the other part of the question.
Okay, and let's see, there's a final question having to do with the link to a trapeze. Is that a one-way or is it a two-way? And
It's a one-way. Those guys don't like playing well.
Yes, that's been my experience as well. So, all right, well, listen, Alan, I really appreciate you guys today. This was great. I hope this was useful for everyone on the line. And again, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us either here at Esri, or we can also connect you over to Alan and his team at DTS. So with that, we'll close out today's webinar, and we want to thank you all for attending. So great, thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks.